Are we on? I can't hear it at all. But anyway, you've stayed with us all day long. This has been a good day, hasn't it? And the crowd has grown, as it were. Well, we've come to the most interesting lecture of the day. But it doesn't hold a candle to the one tomorrow morning, first one tomorrow morning. So don't even think about not being here at 8:30. Is that when it starts? Yes. Oh, my. 8:30 on Saturday morning. The lecture on Mount St. Helens, that is so interesting. It'll make your socks roll up and down. It is good stuff, all right? It will make all of the creation stuff we've been talking about, and especially the age of the earth, information come together and really be cemented in your mind. That is in my opinion, there is no better first dose of creation information than the Mount St. Helens talk. This one really communicates. In fact, I don't see there's any reason not to. It's really good if you're witnessing to somebody who's skeptical about, that the Bible's been disproved, that kind of stuff. They could come to this presentation and say, those creationists, those Christians, they got something going for them. This makes sense. God's really used this presentation. So let me encourage you to invite others. Okay, well, let's talk about the fossil record. The fossil record, if you ask an evolutionist, where is the evidence for evolution? He's likely to say it's in the fossil record. There's where you see one type of animal changing into another type of animal. And the fossils are really the key to evolution. But as we study these fossils here in the next few minutes, you're going to see that they really don't point to evolution at all. But they really specifically speak to a creationist mindset, creationist way of thinking. I wrote a book on the fossils. It came out just about a year ago. And again, most of the pictures that I'll be showing you here are in that book. He's got a whole stack of them back there on the table. There's a Miller. Miller? Gary Miller? Yeah, they have a creation voice here in the area and a creation library with creation books, but also just organizing the creationists in town. So let me encourage you to affiliate with them if you like. And what do? You have monthly meetings or something, or what happens?
Newsletter, prayer list.
Newsletter. Yeah, just keep in touch and make aware of what creationist options are available from time to time. Anyway, stop by the book table back there. There's a bunch of different books, including this one, The Fossil Record. To say it's got all these beautiful pictures in there, dinosaur fossils, and the book is so pretty. I wrote this book. Frank Sherman and I wrote this book, and a lot of people have bought it, but nobody yet has read it. Just look at the pictures. It's almost like a coffee table book. It's so pretty. But, man, there's a powerful lot of stuff in there. Oh, some other. I mentioned this morning that the Young Earth book. This is a real source. This book has a CD in it with about 120 or so PowerPoint slides in there that are just ready to use. Beautiful pictures of geologic sites that most people will never get to. Some of the places I've been to and taken some. Most of them are my pictures in there. And again, they're all done up in PowerPoint format with little explanations that you could use in giving your own lectures. But the fossil book, it doesn't have a CD in it, but it's got a place in the forward that shows you how to go to the ICR website, Institute for Creation Research website, and download all these pictures, again, in PowerPoint format. And my goal is just to equip Christians with this information, and for Sunday school classes and Sunday night services, whatever. It's just really a source that you can use. Another book back there. My father, Dr. Henry Morris, and I co-authored this series of 3 books. It's called the Modern Creation Trilogy. The first one is Scripture in creation, and then there's science in creation, and then society in creation. It's a total full statement of creation thinking in these crucial areas. This is the most up-to-date full statement. There are other books like The Young Earth, which kind of bring one single subject up to date. But this is for high schoolers and stuff, this is just a whale of a lot of information that can be used in term papers and stuff. There's several copies of it back there. Well, we all got to start with a joke, right? Political cartoon. This is little Johnny in the classroom talking with a teacher. She says, yeah, I'll grant you that to begin with, evolution was just a theory, but it evolved into a fact a long time ago. And isn't that the way it is? Evolution has become the fact of evolution, and the only thing to be discussed in the classrooms. And by the way, little Johnny, not only is evolution true, but little Johnny, you are a product of evolution. You're a descendant of the animals. And by the way, I'm going to be training you like Pavlov trained his dogs. Evolution just plays itself out in every area of society. This is a crucial issue. Remind ourselves again of evolution. Evolution is this idea of descent from a common ancestor, that all of life goes back to a common ancestor. The idea is that some 3 or 4 billion years ago, non-living chemicals just got together and made a cell that could move about and assimilate its food and reproduce. And in the process of reproduction, mutations in the reproduction process caused small changes in the offspring, and those offspring added up to where it went from amoeba to man over time. And this is a statement, this is right of Darwin's book. This is the one illustration in his book. Not this drawing, but this concept. And descent from a common ancestor. Expressed also by the geologic column. We talked about that some this morning. That over time, the type of animals and plants that existed at any one time, this is the present, remember, this is the past, this is the long ago past, this is the extremely remote past, this is the origin of the earth down here, the origin of life, multicellular life, fish, reptiles, mammals, and finally man up at the top. So this is the way evolution is thought of. It's presented as if it were the column of fossils. As you'll see here in the next few minutes, the fossils don't look anything like this. This chart is a downright lie. This chart is not even right. I mean, this is wrong. I mean, it is so wrong. It's just not right. I mean, it's just not, it's a lie. And it's presented as if it were true, as if this is the way the fossils appeared. The fossils are very different, as we'll see. Evolution, I think of it, it's more of an idea about who we are than where we came from. Yeah, it's about where we came from, but it's the idea of who we are. We're an animal, right? We're just an animal. In fact, here's a textbook. The textbook says, little Johnny, you are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. Now tell me that doesn't impact little Johnny. Tell me this has no fallout. Here's another one. Oh, I guess not. Evolution says descent from a common ancestor. The creation model, God says very specifically that He created things after their kind. After their kind. It says it 10 times in Genesis chapter 1 in the creation story. It says it 10 times that He created things after their kind. When He created dogs after that kind. And when He created horses after that kind. And when He created chickens, they were after that kind. And fern trees after that kind. And now once a dog is here, it can adapt. It can vary. I mean, we've got all the different breeds of domestic dogs, but dogs and wolves and coyotes and dingoes are all interfertile. It's just a large kind of dogs. And now we have all these different expressions of it. Everyone is a little bit different, but they're all dogs. They're either dogs or not dogs. And if they're not dogs, they're cats, and there's a lot of different cats. But that's the cat kind, and the dog kind, and the horse kind, and the frog kind, and there's variety, but variety is not evolution. Variety is just the God-given breadth of expression and the enhancement of creation, actually, I think. The Bible says God created after its kind. Many varieties can come from a single kind, but one kind never becomes a different kind, as evolution requires. Dogs, when they have puppies, when they have babies, they have puppies. And cats, when they have babies, they have kittens. And when frogs have babies, they have tadpoles. And they're just not the same. And never were the same, never will be the same. Kinds vary within the kind, but they don't change from one kind to another. The creation model, on the other hand, might be expressed by these 2 points. If you're taking notes, this is the key. Creation in a scientific sense. Now, I'm a biblical Christian. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I try to be biblical. Got it? That was supposed to be funny. My wife is laughing most of all here. She knows I just try. But a scientific statement of creation would be sudden appearance. That when dogs got here, they got here as dogs. They appeared as dogs. God didn't take some other kind of animal and change it into this kind of animal. He created this kind of animal and that kind of animal. Sudden appearance. And then the second point is the term called stasis. This is a Greek term. It's used in the New Testament. It means standing still. It's stasis, stationary, static, stays right there. That once dogs got here, they descended into the various breeds of dogs, but they still dogs, and they's not cats. They stayed dogs. Stasis. That's the essence of the creation model. Sudden appearance and stasis. Sudden appearance of multiple kinds, and they have stayed that way. Again, both creationists and evolutionists have the same data, the same facts, the same things for fossils to observe, but we tell different stories about their history, different interpretations of that data, of that evidence, of those data. Because we start our study from different bias, from a different assumption set, different presuppositions. If one starts with a biblical, with a naturalistic assumption set that only natural processes have ever occurred, like natural selection, no supernatural, you can look at the data and tell an evolutionary story about it. But if you start with a biblical set of assumptions, when you look at the data, you can tell a biblically consistent story about its unobserved origins. I mean, we didn't observe creation. The Bible promises it's over. God finished His creation. It's not happening today, but neither is evolution. They're both worldviews about history. They're trying to explain the fact that you and I are here either without a God or with a God. Of course, the Bible teaches creation. Rocks and fossils, that's where you find the evidence for evolution at an old Earth. Rocks and fossils are really key. I'm just wondering. I mean, rocks and fossils are used in that chart and all, but I'm just wondering, is there another interpretation? Let's see if we can't derive another interpretation here. That fossil column, let's think, is there another interpretation? Could these fossils, could these rocks be due to the great flood of Noah's day? God created, and I don't think He created rocks with fossils in them. Got it? He created rocks, and He created things, but things that are fossils, they got here somehow else, I guess, after the creation. And I think it was the great flood of Noah's day. Fossils may be the best test case between creation and evolution. Evolution, the way evolution thinks about fossils, is that the fossils are the remains of plants and animals which evolved by natural processes, not by supernatural creation. And then these plants and animals were buried in watery sediments that have now hardened into sedimentary rocks over great ages. That's the way evolution thinks about the fossils. Got it? Creation thinks something different about the fossils. They agree that there are remains of plants and animals, but creation thinks that these animals and plants were created by the God of the Bible, and then subsequent to their creation, individuals were buried rapidly in watery sediments by the great flood of Noah's day. Both sides agree that these are remains of plants and animals, and they both agree that they're buried in watery sediments. This one says slowly, this one says rapidly. We have a lot of agreement. It's just that we tell a different story about its unobserved history. Got it? If evolution is true, and each type descended through ancestral types, from ancestral types through, if a fish became an amphibian, fish and amphibians, they have some similarity, but they're a lot different too. If a fish evolved into an amphibian, it would go through many different in-between forms. Where here's 100% fish and you're going toward 100% amphibian, well, the next step might be 90% fish, 10% amphibian, and then 80% fish, 20% amphibian, then 70% fish, 30% amphibian, and on up, and you've got all these in-between forms, these transitional fishibians between one and the other. If evolution is true, these transitional forms did exist, and you would think some of them would be found as fossils. You'd think. Creation, if you got a fish evolving into an amphibian, evolution says as you come up the strata, this pancake, obviously this pancake came later than that pancake, and so in each step you'd be a little bit more amphibian-like, and finally you'd be an amphibian. Well, this is a cryptopterygian fish. That's the most amphibian-like fish, and that's a labyrinthodont amphibian. And evolution says you ought to have all these transitional forms. Creation says no. Fish and amphibians and every different type was created separately, abruptly, fully formed without transitional forms. They stayed the same. They didn't transist. And because the transitional forms never existed, you're never going to find transitional forms. They just never existed. Well, I mean, there's the fish, and there's fish in several different pancakes, and then there's amphibians in several different pancakes, and they overlap, but there's nothing in between. That's what a creationist would expect to find. Well, this is a wonderful time to be a Bible-believing creationist, because even my evolutionary colleagues now are admitting that you don't find these transitional forms. You just don't find them. In fact, here's a quote from Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, who until he died a few years ago was the leading evolutionary spokesman. He's an expert on the fossil record. He's a professor at Harvard University, a famous expert on the fossil record, and a thoroughgoing atheist, a thoroughgoing evolutionist. He is an anti-creationist. He's a Christian hater, a Christian baiter. He's a thoroughgoing atheist Marxist. But he's an expert on the fossils, and he admits the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persist as the trade secret of paleontology, or the study of the fossils. The extreme rarity of transitional forms. And he's the expert. If he had transitional forms to raise up the flagpole, he would do it. Here's another quote from another famous evolutionist. He says, the known fossil record fails to document a single example of basic body style evolution. It fails to document a single example. A single example. It fails to do a single example. Well, if you have less than a single example, how many do you have? This evolutionist says we don't have one transitional form. Well, if the fossil record fails to document evolutionary change, what does it document? Let's look at the fossils and see. Here's that geologic column. One thing the geologic column documents is an explosion of life, an abrupt explosion of life in what we call the Cambrian period. Each one of these layers over here, is tens and 40 million years long each one. And it's like a stack of pancakes. This is the first pancake, or the ones that lower down in the column are the first pancakes, and then the second pancake, and the third pancake, and there's a whole stack of pancakes. Obviously, the one at the bottom got here before the one at the top. But this one at the bottom, evolution says that down here, life came from non-life, spontaneous generation. If there's ever been anything totally disproved in science, it's spontaneous generation. But yet evolution believes in spontaneous generation. It's a very hopelessly unscientific theory. But, okay, they say that somehow spontaneous generation happened, and then things begin changing. But these things down here in the Precambrian time are just simple little single-cell things and little bacteria and simple things. But then suddenly, something changed. And then there's the Cambrian period, and below here there's hardly anything, there's just nothing. But then suddenly in the Cambrian period there's an explosion of life, of just the myriads of marine invertebrates like starfish and clams and trilobites and jellyfish and brachiopods and coral and just all kinds of animals. There's nothing below it, and then suddenly there's all of these things. In fact, every basic body style of animal and plant, of animal, every basic body style. There's, depending on who's counting, some say 30, some say 60, but every one of those basic body styles is found in that Cambrian period, that lowest pancake level. Every one of them. Well, when I say every one of them, the fish are found down there too. And they consider us a fish because we have a vertebrae. We're just a vertebrate. We're part of the vertebrates. Okay? So the vertebrates also are in that lowest level. There's nothing, and then there's everything. My evolutionary colleagues, they say to me, Morris, there's no evidence for creation. I say, for crying in a bucket, what kind of evidence are you looking for? You've got nothing, and then you've got everything. That's creation. That's abrupt appearance. Got it? By the way, when they talk about the vertebrates, do you know which of the invertebrates, the animals without a backbone, they say gave rise to the vertebrates? Our grandfather is a starfish. That's what they say. The echinoderms. The fossil evidence, there's a very famous fossil. That's a trilobite. Famous fossil. But evolution says that things started off simply with this bacteria and single-cell organisms. And these things got more and more complexity as you go up the pancakes, and finally you got man. So it goes from simple to complex, amoeba to man. Isn't that what evolution says? Well, the trilobites, which is the very common fossil, even in that low pancake, that thing is very, very complex. It is as complex as any animal alive today. In fact, look at the eye. The eye on the trilobite, here's a close-up of the eye. It's called a complex lens. This is a fossil eyeball. This is more complicated, more engineered, more designed than your. Well, it's called a complex lens. We have the single lens. This is an amazingly complex, and it's in that lowest level. Don't tell me the fossils go simple to complex. That is not true. The fossils go complex to complex to complex to complex, complex today. Every life is complex. There is no such thing as simple life. There are some forms of life that are more simple than other forms of life. But every form of life, even the amoeba, is complex. Complex. It's just complex.
Amen.
Complex. And the fossils show stasis. Do you recognize this animal right here? What's that? Snail? That's a clam. And what does it look like? It looks like a clam. That's supposed to be a 100-million-year-old clam. I found it down in Texas. A lot of clams down in Texas. I mean, Texas is just made of clams. It's just clams. But those clams look like clams. Where's the evolution? Fossils look just like their modern counterparts. Here's an interesting fossil. This is a fossil, it turns out it's a crocodile. It's a crocodile, well, it's a phytosaur, but it's a crocodile. And they say it's 200 million years old, and it looks like a crocodile. Nothing has changed this thing in 200 million years. There's what's called a paddlefish. Paddlefish are swimming around in the Great Lakes and in the Columbia River. I mean, paddlefish are around today. They're filter feeders, but it looks like a paddlefish. They say this paddlefish is 300 million years old, but it's identical to modern paddlefish. Stasis, that's what we see in the fossil record. Things staying the same. The story of evolution says things change, develop into something else. No, what we see is stasis. Remember, science has to do with observation. We do not observe evolution. What we do observe is stasis. Stasis is the opposite of evolution. That is what we observe, is stasis. Got it? No evidence of any kind changing into another kind. Now, there are some fossils that have gone extinct. There's the trilobites. The trilobites don't appear to be around today. We've not found any living trilobites. But extinction is not evolution. Again, extinction is the opposite of evolution. If evolution happened, you got to get new stuff. All we observe is things going extinct and disappearing. We observe the opposite of evolution. The scientific observation is the opposite of evolution. What a wonderful time to be a Bible-believing Christian and creationist. What's that look like? It's a fish. Looks like a fish to me. Actually, these smell kind of like fish if you just break them open. There's a catfish. Anybody up here like catfish? They live on catfish down in Texas. Fossil catfish looks just like a living catfish. Stasis. There's a stingray. They say it's 50 million years old, but it looks like a stingray to me. Stasis. There's a squid. Squid fossil. Squid, you don't have many squid fossils because they're mostly made out of water. Just a bag of skin with water, but sometimes they get fossilized. And this squid looks like a living squid. They say that this squid is 160 million years old, but it looks like a squid. What's that? What does it look like? Yeah, stasis. What does that look like? They say that's 300 million years old, but dragonflies haven't changed a lick in 300 million years. Now, when I say the numbers 300 million years or 60 million years, understand, I don't believe that number. I'm critiquing that number. I'm showing you how foolish that number is. Got it? I'm pointing out the weaknesses in what they're saying. They're saying that, well, something changed into a dragonfly, and it did so rapidly we don't see the fossils. But once the dragonfly got here, it didn't change a bit in 300 million years. This is not a good theory. What's that? That's a cockroach. Now, you don't have a problem with cockroaches up here. But do you know cockroaches haven't changed a lick in 250 million years? They were as disgusting 250 million years ago as they are now. They look like a cockroach. What's that? Well, that's a beetle. There's lots of different kinds of beetles. This one is a 50 million year old beetle, but it looks like a beetle to me. It's a shield. It's a stink bug is what it is. And it looks like a stink bug. What's that? Well, it's a frog. What's it look like? Yeah. Huh. There's a frog. I mean, stasis. That's what we see. The fossil record is not pointing out evolution. It's pointing out stasis. Now, it can be interpreted as a frog coming from something else, going to something else, but it's not the best interpretation. The best interpretation looks to me like frogs have always been frogs. Got it? In fact, some people say, isn't a tadpole changing into a frog an example of evolution? A lot of people have said that. No, it's not at all. It has nothing to do with evolution because it doesn't have anything to do with evolution any more than a baby changing into a man. It's a growth. It's a stage of growth. It's a period of life. And besides, when frogs have babies, they have tadpoles, and when tadpoles grow up to be frogs, that have babies that are tadpoles. It's going nowhere. It's just a stage of life. Stasis, that's what we see. There's a bat. They say that's 65 million year old bat, but it looks like a bat. And even you can carefully look at the head and see that it's got the echolocation features that are supposed to be the very advanced radar technology. They had it. This is the first bat. This is the oldest known bat fossil, and it already has the echo and the echolocation features, the radar features. Complex at every stage, has all the features at the first stage. This is not evolution. This is not evolution. Ugh. Snakes. Snakes are rare in the fossil record, but I've never found a snake fossil, to tell you the truth, but whenever you find a snake fossil, it's recognizable. You know what it is. Snakes have the multiple dozens of vertebrae down their backbone, and they're snakes. But here's the question. Evolution says that something that wasn't a snake evolved into a snake. What was that? What non-snake evolved into a snake? And similarly with turtles. There's a snake, and this is a turtle. Turtles are pretty common. They're easily fossilized because they've got the hard outer shell and the hard underplate. What non-turtle evolved into a turtle? I mean, turtles. There's some variety of turtles, but what non-turtle even looks like it could become a turtle? They would say that somehow some animal with a rib cage, the ribs are in the front and in the back, somehow the ribs fused together and migrated to the outside of the skin on both sides. But if they did, you'd have some record of that, I would think. It would take millions of years to get that done, just by birth defects. What non-turtle became a turtle? And what non-snake became a snake? The fossils do show variety. There's a lot of variety among the fossils. This is an ammonite fossil. It's a very common type of fossil. A lot of ammonites and a lot of variety of ammonites. But they're either ammonites or not ammonites. What non-ammonite became an ammonite? Ammonites, even today, there are some ammonites still alive. The chambered nautilus is an ammonite. what it is. The animal lived on the sticking out of the end here. But as each growth period of it's a squid-like thing. It walls it off and, builds a bigger chamber. And so it lives out here. But it's beautiful. These are decorative pieces. But ammonites in the fossil record show that same beauty, the same features, the same different walls. There's no real change. Some are big. Some are small. Some have smooth shells. Some have these ribbed shells. And believe it or not, evolutionists make a big deal about this. See the differences? This proves evolution. The ribbed shells and smooth shells, that proves that you came from a fish. No, it doesn't. It proves that ammonites vary. It's an example of stasis. This isn't any change going anywhere. It's variety. It's like brown eyes and blue eyes. That's about all it is. And that's not evolution. One thing the fossils also show is rapid burial. Here's a Texas clam. Notice that with this clam, the two halves are tightly shut. Clams have, two shells, one on either side. They have a muscle that attaches them, and clams can do a lot of stuff. I mean, clams sit there and they eat things out of the water, and actually can burrow underground. Clams can do some tricky stuff. But if you disturb a clam, he takes those two halves and slams them shut. He clams up. That's where we get the expression. He clams up for protection with his hard outer shell, his exoskeleton. This clam, well, he's not alive. He's a fossil clam. This is a 100-million-year-old clam. But notice he's clammed up. If you disturb a living clam, he'll clam up for protection. This clam, I found this clam in an outcrop where they're just clams. You just get your arms get tired pulling them out of the wall. They're just clams. A lot of clams. They're in there by the millions and millions of clams. Clams, when you find clams, I don't know, anybody ever find clams? Sometimes you'll find them 10, 15, 30 maybe in a pile, but not by the millions. There's nothing there to eat. There's nowhere to go. I mean, it looks like they're just piled in there like gravel. And I think that's what was happening. I think during the flood, water velocities picked up all the living clams, and they're protecting themselves. They're bouncing along, bouncing into each other, and they're protecting themselves like baseballs being washed away. And then finally the flood just dumps them in there, and they're dumped in there, and they're underneath everybody else, and they can't even burrow out. And they died there and fossilized there, and that's where we find them. They were buried alive. Usually a clam, when it dies, it opens up and the birds eat the insides. But this guy was buried so deeply, he couldn't even open up and died there, and that's where he fossilized. Rapid burial alive. This is a very common thing in the fossil record. Here's a rapid burial. This is a fish fossil, but this fish is in the process of eating another fish. Big fish, little fish. I've seen a number of these. Most fossil fish are not eating another, but there's quite a few of them. Here's a big fish eating a little fish. And notice the precise nature of a fish. A fish, when it dies, it doesn't stay so precise. It rots. And in fact, a fish that's even buried, the gases on the inside will build up and it'll explode. But yet this thing is just in there. I mean, it's just all the little fine little bones. Rapid burial, pristine conditions, quick fossilization. It was buried so rapidly he didn't even have time to swallow lunch. But he's not swimming in water. He's buried in rock. These are sediments. This is sedimentary rock. So he's buried in the sediments. Now, he doesn't swim around in sediments. He swims around in water. But if there's sediments being piled into the water and he gets trapped in there and he's buried in there and he's alive and that's what's happening here. And now the sediments have just piled up, and now the sediments have hardened into sedimentary rock, and the dead thing is hardened into a fossil. Rapid burial, we see that very common in the fossil record. Here's another example of rapid burial. This is a very large marine reptile, about 10 feet long. This is a big fossil. But this mama ichthyosaur is in the process of giving birth. Here's the young one exiting the birth canal. Now, Mom, sometimes it takes a while to birth a baby, right? There's a reason we call it labor. But it doesn't take millions of years, right? This is rapid burial. And again, this thing is a strong swimmer in the water, but now this water is just so clouded with sediments that it just is trapped and buried. It's like it's not quite the same, but it's like if you're in quicksand and you go down in the quicksand and now you're just surrounded by the sand. He's surrounded by the sand, but the sand came down from the top. It wasn't that he fell into the sand. But it's just the same sort of thing. Now you're just getting trapped by this stuff that's building up around you. The fossils show mass mortality. When you find fossils, usually you don't find any fossils, but when you do find fossils, there's usually just a pile of fossils. Here's an interesting fossil slab. It's about a 10-foot slab. It was buried. It's flat, but now I've got it up so you can see it. This is looking down on the top of the slab. Notice that all these ammonites, a lot of ammonites. Sometimes ammonites had a straight shell. The same animal, just with a straight shell. Most of them had a coiled shell. A different variety. I'm sure they're related. But notice that all these pointy ones, they're all pointed in the same direction. To the upper end of the... It's as if there was a current of mud flowing in one direction, and it was able to orient these pointy shells upstream. The pointy end goes upstream. But then it trapped them there, and they couldn't get out, and that's where we find them. This is in Morocco. I don't know, Morocco is just made up of fossils. It's an amazing place. Here's a whole mountainside full of dinosaur fossils. I don't know. I found some dinosaur fossils because I kind of know where to look, and I've been out doing it. But most people never find a vertebrate fossil like this. You find just marine invertebrates like clams. But when you find dinosaur fossils, they're just a big mixture of them. It's like in fact, in this picture right here are one or two bones from like 20 different dinosaurs. You don't find any of the carcasses here. You just find a piece of them, and they're all just mixed in there together. Mass mortality of animals ripped apart and buried in mass. This is not how things die. This is a fossil graveyard, they call it. But, yeah, I guess. But the things have already been ripped apart. They didn't get scavenged so much as they got ripped apart, and they're just in there in pieces, torn apart. I mean, how much force does it take to rip a leg off of a brontosaur? That's what we got right here. This is mass mortality, incredible forces. I think this is Noah's flood did this. The fossils primarily come from the catastrophic flood of Noah's day. There's not only fossil evidence, but there's biological evidence of catastrophic deposition. A few years ago, they found, about 10 years ago, this one fossil dinosaur was found. And when they tried to extract it and take it down to the museum, one of the bones was too big to get into the helicopters out in North Dakota someplace. And so they had to slice it in half to get it in the helicopter. And then they can glue it back together at the museum. That happens a lot. Well, when they got it into the lab and started preparing it, one of the scientists began to notice inside the bone, it wasn't just a bone. There was soft stuff in there. And they began to prepare it, and there is soft tissue, blood vessels, blood cells, the kinds of things that deteriorate and disintegrate in a matter of just years, you can hardly imagine a way to keep these things around for 5,000 years, but to keep it around for 65 million years? Do you know how long 65 million years is? No, you don't. Nobody knows how long 65 million years is. Very few people even know how long 100 years is. Some do. But everybody that's 100 certainly doesn't want to live to 200. But to live to 1,000 years? Or 10,000 years? Or 100,000 years? Or 1,000,000 years? Or 65 million years? That is as unfathomable as eternity. Our minds go tilt at that point. We can't even think about 1,000,000 years. And yet evolutionists throw that around as if they knew what they're talking about, and it's just hokey pokey talk. It just has no meaning to the human mind. These things, it's still stretchy like a rubber band, like a blood vessel you take out of your chicken dinner. We found a dinosaur mummy. This thing looked just like a dog that had been hit by a car and there by the side of the road. It was just pristine. There's no decay. I mean, how can they say with a straight face that these things are millions and millions and 65 or 100 million years old? It doesn't make sense. There's just a lot of these fossils look fresh. Some of the fish I'm telling you about, when you break them out, you smell them, it smells like a dead fish. I mean, it just... Here's an interesting fossil. This is a squid fossil. This squid, they say it was 160 million years old. Squids have ink sac for camouflage. When they found the ink sac, they pulled it out, and it still had ink in it. And he took that ink, put it in a fountain pen, and drew a sketch of the squid. It's still fresh. Guys, it's not old. The Bible is true. Yeah. Here's an interesting mosasaur fossil. It's about 10 feet long. It's a big one. But when they found it, they found not only the bones, but they were fresh bones. They found the heart and the liver, and they found the eyeballs. And they found in the eyeballs there's still the retina and the color in the retina. This thing is just, it's dead, it's fossilized, but there are features to it that cannot possibly last very long. In fact, you know, our meat packing plants and stuff, we do experiments on this. How can we keep this meat fresh? Under what conditions can we do cryogenic freezing or whatever, and still it decays? How do you keep something from decaying for millions and millions of years? You see the problem? These things aren't that old. Here's an interesting fossil. Actually, this is a fossil we have on our wall there at Institute for Creation Research. We got a lot of fossils down there. If you're ever down in Dallas, come visit us. A lot of fossils. But this is a dinosaur fossil right here. It's only crow-sized. You may not know that, but most of the dinosaurs were rather small. A lot of them were the size of a chicken or a turkey or something like that. This one was a crow size. I mean, a crow is a big bird, but it's a bird, you know, and it's... this is a land-based dinosaur. Walks around on the land. He doesn't go into water. Maybe they go into water to catch fish. But here this guy got buried in there with a fish. But notice something. I mean, this guy doesn't... He might go into water. But this is not water. This is rock. This is sedimentary rock. They were buried in sediments that hardened into sedimentary rock. And notice the fish. It's a dead fish. But a fish, when it dies, it just lays there like a loaf of bread or something. A fish, when it's alive and suffocating, is flipping and flapping, and you know this. That guy's flipping and flapping. He's not just a loaf of bread laying there. He's struggling for a breath of air. You know, the water through his gills. But he asphyxiated. He died by strangulation. And also the dinosaur. Notice, well, this animal, his head would normally be right over here. His neck would come out this way. This guy's neck is cranking back over his back. And this is a very typical pose that animals take when they're dying of asphyxiation, when they're drowning, when they don't have air to breathe. They're just gulping for anything. But this guy is in the water, and now he's in the sediments. The sediments are building up around his feet and legs, and now he can't move. He's stuck there, and now it's over his knees, and now it's over his hips, and he's getting frantic, and he can't get out, and fish are dying, and pretty soon the water, which is filled with sediments, is choking him, and he's drowning, and he's gasping for a breath of air, and he died right there. He died in that death pose. This is not a normal living pose. This is a dying pose. He's buried alive in the process of strangling, asphyxiating. This is in the geologic literature. I picked up on this. These geologists were pointing out that so many of the dinosaur fossils, usually when you find a dinosaur fossil, you find a piece of one bone. There's no pose there. It's ripped apart. But whenever you find a carcass of a dinosaur, it almost always has this pose. It almost always gives evidence of having been drowned. Noah's flood was a horrible thing. Everything died. There's Struthiomimus. Look at his head reaching back. His head would normally be out here somewhere. Got it? He drowned. But he's buried in sediments, watery sediments. And then Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx, that's the poster boy for evolution. It's thought to be a dino bird that shows how dinosaurs evolved into birds. Archaeopteryx, though, there's only about 8 Archaeopteryx fossils ever been found. Here's one of the most famous ones. But look at him. He's got his head cranked back. Here's another one. Got his head cranked back. They drowned. There's another one. And you could a lot of these dinosaur-type fossils, they drowned. They died by drowning, as you would expect in the great flood of Noah's day. The Bible says everything that lived on dry land died by the waters of the flood. Microraptor, same thing. Well, we could beat that horse to death. Let me point out to you that the fossil record doesn't look at all like that geologic column of fossils that I showed you. The fossils on that geologic column, it showed bacteria, and then it showed marine invertebrates, then it showed fish, then it showed amphibians, then it showed reptiles, then it showed mammals, then it showed man. Well, the fossil record, no, the fossil record really, 95% of all fossils are marine invertebrates. That chart was over 50% land mammals. The real fossil record, 95% of them are marine invertebrates, like clams. Of the 5% that's left, 95% of them are plants. Well, that leaves just a little bit left. Most of them are fish. Where are the land vertebrates? There's a little bit left, and most of them are insects. There's hardly any land fossils. Hardly any. Much less than 1% are land vertebrates, and usually those are just a piece of one bone. The fossil record doesn't look at anything at all like the evolutionary geologic column. The fossil record looks very, very different. Evolutionists have been lying to us. They've been telling us the fossil record proves evolution, but they're presenting the fossil record very different than what it really is. And those fossils, those marine fossils, those ocean fossils, all of them are found on the continents. These ocean fossils, none of them are found in the oceans. Now put that in your pipe and smoke it. All of these ocean fossils are found in Texas. They're not found in the ocean. They're found in Kansas. They're found in British Columbia. They're found on the land, in the rocks, on the land. They're not found in the ocean. There are no fossils. Now, we could talk about how that happened, and I'm prepared to do that, but not tonight. One thing that it definitely does tell us is that something different was going on in the past. Something very different. This takes uniformity and just scratches a big X through it. Something different was going on in the past. Got it? Here's a marine fossil. It was just like a little roundy river rock, but if you crack it, it cracks open and there's an ammonite inside. This ammonite was found on Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. On the top of Mount Everest, you know what there is? It's clams. Now, some would say, well, Noah's flood covered the world. It must have washed over Mount Everest and left these clams up there. No, that's not the way it worked. Noah's flood laid down all these pancake layers of sediments, and in these layers of sediments are dead clams. But then late in the flood, these layers of sediments buckled up into mountain chains. That's the Himalaya Mountains. That's the Rocky Mountains. That's the Appalachian Mountains. That's the Alps. That's the Andes. These are ocean bottom sediments buckled up. And at the top of these mountains are ocean bottom fossils. Here's that geologic column again. See all these land-based animals. No, the fossil record looks like this. But notice that each one of these layers, they have different names, the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian. And each one of these, well, this one is 100 million years long, this Cambrian layer around here. And this is 75 million years long. This is 20 million years. That's 60 million years. You add all that stuff up, and it's, like 600 million years. Obviously, that's a long time. But sometimes you find one fossil that goes through several layers. This is a tree. It's a petrified tree. A petrified tree sticking up through millions and millions of years of strata. Trees don't live that long. Even dead trees don't last that long. It's just a wonderful time to be a Bible-believing Christian. Fossils, don't think fossils take a long time to form. They can form, in fact, the only way we know to form fossils is to do it rapidly, but you got to have the right conditions. If you don't have the right conditions, the thing will deteriorate and it'll disappear. It'll rot. Bacteria will get it. But if the conditions are there, it will fossilize rapidly. Human bones, people say, why don't we find more human bones? Well, most of the fossil deposition, I'll talk about it some tomorrow morning. And by the way, don't even think of missing tomorrow morning. That is so interesting. But most of the deposition of the fossils is in underwater mud flows. Don't think that water is just trickling out, settling out of moving water. It's underwater mud flows, like cement coming off a cement truck. But then it's pouring along the bottom of the ocean. And I'm going to close here. You told me I could go on forever. I'm within sight. I'm within sight of the end, but I'm not there yet. Just wait a minute. Just wait. Most of it is these underwater mud flows, and these things are so energetic. Some of them are flowing at 40 miles an hour with the consistency of cement coming off a cement truck. And if an animal is in the path of that 40-mile-an-hour cement flowing along, it's not going to last. It's going to be broken up. It's going to be ground to powder is what's going to happen. And so all of the deposition is going on at the bottom of the ocean. Humans are mammals. We hardly find any mammal fossils. But mammals and humans in water, dead animals, float. They float. They're on the top. All the deposition is going on down here. Somehow you got to get them to the bottom in order to get trapped in there. And really the only thing you can get trapped in those kinds of conditions that would survive is a thing like a clam with a hard outer shell, looks like a baseball. You know, it could sink through the water and get caught in there and protect itself, and that has a higher fossilization potential. You hardly find any mammal fossils, and you certainly hardly find any human fossils. We wouldn't expect to find human fossils. We're looking. I wish we did find some, but we don't find the human bones. Sometimes we do, but human artifacts sometimes are found. Here's an interesting human artifact. Well, that's petrified wood. By the way, I was taught, and you were too, that it takes millions and millions of years to petrify wood, right? Millions of years. Did you know that this petrified wood, there's a lot of petrified wood, it's no big deal, but this petrified wood is a petrified fence post. Farmer put out a fence, 1850 or so. It rotted away, but the part that was underground was fossilized. And so now we find this fence line of fence post stubs, a split rail fence. Here's an interesting fossil. It's an iron pot. This is not a fossil. That's my lovely wife, Dalta. In fact, if you haven't met Dalta, she's over here, right? She's right here. That's Dalta. She's not a fossil. But that's what we call an anomalous fossil. Well, just to sum up, the main points of the fossil record. The fossil record does not point to evolution. Doesn't. The fossil record points to sudden appearance. And it's to stasis. Shows complexity at the start. The fossil record does show extinction, but not evolution. Doesn't show these transitional forms. And everything's there at the start. Most fossils are marine invertebrates. The fossils, most of them died catastrophic death and buried rapidly. And then these fossils, these marine fossils found mostly on the continents. This is not what evolution would predict. This is the true nature of the fossil record. Well, I think it was the flood of Noah's day that did it all. The flood of Noah's day really did happen. It was a worldwide mountain-covering deluge. And what a flood like that would do would be to lay down lots and lots of layers of sediments that have now hardened into sedimentary rock full of dead things that died in the flood. And if the flood made the fossils, then there is no evidence for evolution. There is no evidence for millions of years. The earth is young. Evolution did not happen, just like the Bible says. Evolution is best understood as the religion of naturalism, of anti-supernaturalism. That's why we fight it. That's why they fight us, because we have two religions at war. And it gets nasty sometimes. Well, I'm through. I'm over time, but I'm just going to remind you one last time that these books are back there. The fossil record, now that you know the kind of pictures that are in there, do stop and take a look. The Young Earth book is back there, but there's a whole bunch of others. There's, I don't know, I've been involved in, I've led 13 different expeditions to Mount Ararat over in Turkey to look for Noah's Ark. And as far as I know, there's just one copy of the book that I wrote on the search for Noah's Ark. A lot of pictures in here of Mount Ararat. A lot of our adventures up there on the mountain. have had quite a few adventures. We've been shot at, we've been thrown in jail, we've been captured by terrorists, we've been attacked by wolves, we've been, I want to, probably the worst thing that happened to us happened at about 14,000 feet elevation one day when I and two other guys got caught in an electrical storm and actually got struck by lightning. I was badly injured, paralyzed up there in the snow up on the glacier for about 4 hours, just laying there paralyzed, dying, expecting to die. But God just reached down and miraculously allowed us to recuperate from our injuries and continue the search for the ark. That was my first expedition. Been there 13 expeditions. Some people never learn. Oh, another book. My father and I co-authored that book. That's a really good book. Well, okay, I quit. Okay. Oh, one last thing. The ICR website, the continual dose of information on creation, ICR.org. That's Institute for Creation Research.org. So keep in touch with us. God bless you. I hope this was helpful. God, thanks for listening. Sorry I took so long. Ted, it's up to you.
Let's start with a congregational song this morning. And so we'll have Joe come up, and we'll have Pam playing again. So where'd Joe go?